right?
Yeah, I think that's good. I think that you can share it, and I think that you can like summarize it like the entire chapter with GitOps. In general, I would agree to that. But GitOps, when you just describe it, at least to me, it means basically having the state of my clusters in a Git repository that then I will use a tool to sync against one or different real clusters. And for me, that's a fine thing. Like in the Kubernetes space, that's kind of like what I think that we all think when we talk about GitOps. I don't know, like if that's the first thing that you come to your mind, Carlos. The state.
Unfortunately, a lot of folks that I talk to that are in
Mhm.
production have been using Kubernetes for a long time.
Yep.
They're not using GitOps.
Mhm.
So the perception of like what is it being blogged, what is the latest trend, is so easy to run in kind.
Mhm.
That's one aspect. And I get shocked by talking to so many so many end users, right?
Mhm.
And they're like starting to think about how to do GitOps because they have
Right.
complex systems and they've been using Kubernetes for a long time, right?
Mhm.
And in those end users organizations, people go and they come and that's such those type of things. So it's GitOps. Yes, it's a best practice to a certain degree.
Mhm.
Not everyone use it. You don't have to use it, right, to be cloud native.
Mhm.
But it's one of the things that people want to learn about it, right? So I think
Yeah.
it's still a lot of people want to learn because they want to actually do it or get better at it.
Mhm.
So before that, let's recap what happened in the previous, a little bit on the previous chapter, because we had, I think somebody is
Typing. Unmuted.
typing very
I'm
heavily
sorry,
on
that's
their
me.
keyboard.
Yeah, I'm
Okay.
That's okay.
muting myself.
Thank you, Sevi. And I think you can use spacebar like to unmute. What I was going to say is I was not here in the last when you folks
Mhm.
discussed, but I watched the recording, and that reminds me. I think I posted it on YouTube. I double check. Yeah, I think I did
I
because
think you do.
I did it in KubeCon.
Yep.
But just for a recap, maybe people that were not last week, is like in chapter 3 was the service pipeline,
Mhm.
and to me that's sometimes called like the CI pipeline. That the end result of that pipeline is an artifact.
Mhm.
Before container images, this was a thing, right? An
Exactly.
artifact was a WAR file. At least in my days, if I'm dating
Yeah, yeah.
myself, right? The WAR file, and the WAR file that you put in a Java runtime, J2EE runtime.
Mhm.
So anyone is that dated like me, or I'm the oldest person in this room?
I am, and I can relate, right? Like even if you were like
Me
doing Go
too.
before, if you were doing Go before, right? Like you distributed the binaries, right?
Yep.
It's the same kind of like in different stacks. There are some stacks where you don't need to produce a binary to distribute, but I remember even when using Java, you also needed like an artifactory,
Yeah,
like an
Ant,
artifact
right?
repository, right?
You
Yeah,
use Ant, and then you
yeah.
use a computer
Mhm.
in the desk. Literally, I work here. I mean, Greg also worked here in IBM in RTP, and I had a desk and I had a computer under my desk,
Mhm.
and that was the build machine that built the ISO or build the WAR file, right?
Exactly.
And then later we move into a more robust build system. But the end result is you name it here service, because Kubernetes is around services, right? And Kubernetes has a service
I
or a SaaS
think that
service.
Yeah, no. So I basically name it after kind of like what developers will be building, right? Like
They
those
build
artifacts, they build microservices, right? Like they will just
microservices.
distribute it
Yep.
microservices, yeah. And I'm calling it service because it's a more like logical unit.
Yep.
It's something that you will just need to deploy somewhere. It will need some infrastructure. I can like explain that the service pipeline is basically producing the artifact, but the artifact cannot run alone. The artifact needs to run in an environment with another with a very specific setup, different components that needs to be set up for the applications to run. And I think that that's kind of like what I'm moving into this chapter. I'm basically starting talking about like the need for different environments to deploy our applications, and the fact that in companies it's quite normal to have more than a single environment to deploy and test your applications. And I
Yep.
think that the transition between environments is where where things gets interesting. But I think that I focus this chapter around the idea of GitOps and how to manage these different stages of your deployments into a Git repository. You can see the second diagram there. that basically is showing that no matter how many services are you deploying, you are always going to deploy these services in different environments, and you can manage those environments in a more, secure and simplified way, if you say so, to just store the state of the cluster into a Git repository.
Yeah, and it's a pattern that I've seen that the idea is that you're building an artifact once, and I think some people actually like have trouble like getting that right, because the idea is you create that WAR file, you don't create another, you don't run the build again to create the same WAR file again and deploy to staging or QA and then build it again for production. I've seen that. I've seen CI/CD pipelines in Kubernetes with images where people like build the image and put it in dev. They rebuild the image and put it in stage, and they rebuild the image and put it in production. And what is a more best practice is you build that image once, right? And it's an image. At the end of the day, container image is the tar file. Like that's the secret that a lot of people don't know. Like the image is literally a tar file.
Yeah.
And then you build that once, and then I was saying the new trend, but another best practice on top of it, you sign it, right? You put an SBOM and then you sign it. You put a signature on it, and then that's the same image. That code is the image that you're going to deploy in dev, staging, production, QA, manual QA, and the things that you change on it is the configuration. This is what you have here, right? A database where configuration, you just change the configuration, but that image is immutable with a tag and a chat 256. And a lot of people like clobber that tag, which is an anti-pattern. I don't know. Eric wants to say something about signing images as a best practice.
Eric, go for it.
You do it.
You need to do it. Yeah.
That's a whole other talk.
Yep. So let's go over what you had here of like the different configurations. So one thing is the service has a version, right? You have here one, two. The same service has the same version, but now the configuration is different. So
depending on the environment, right? Because the configuration in the repository is not for the service itself. The service is included, but it also includes all the other things that needs to be set up for that environment to run.
Yep. And
I have one question around this, but
go for it.
If you don't mind. So I'm thinking about image publish here. Like you can have a very guardrailed environment. Imagine you're at a bank and your development and staging and production are like very highly separated. So thinking that the image deployment process here, how would you do it? So for example, would you put dev images that might have issues in them or might have, some images that dev teams play around with and don't mean to actually put into production should stay there? Or like, would you always go for production to pull and maybe not being able to push? So I was thinking about the image promotion process, or like, would you be able to only publish from staging to production and no one else touches the production image artifactory?
Carlos, do you want to answer that, or should I go?
I have different.
Just a discussion, to be honest.
Yeah, it's a practice. I can tell you what happens in real productions environments from some of the end users I help, which is they have a registry for production, and the cluster only pulls from that registry, and then they have a different registry for dev and staging, and the clusters in dev and stage only pull from that registry. So your question is around like, if I have an image and I put it in staging, how does it get in production? Because production cannot pull from the registry that is in staging. You have to have orchestration that is like takes the image and move it to the other one. And the anti-pattern is to do from your CI pipeline to do a Docker pull and a Docker push. That's an anti-pattern. People are like, why? Like, how else are you going to pull from one and push to another one? Best practice is using tools like Crane or Scopio, and you literally take the image as it is and you copy it over. You never push, because then you'll be like changing things on the image if you do a pull and push. But that's
change the
it also
metadata, right?
depends on what access you are putting in your pipeline, right? Like somebody could change the image on the pipeline.
Yeah,
Exactly.
that's what I've seen. I don't know, Mauricio.
No, I think that's spot on. I think that the thing that I wanted to mention about this diagram is that, for example, the images and where the images are being pulled from are described in the configuration that it's going to be synced against the cluster, right?
Yep.
So that's included there. Like you will see that these different repositories, these different configuration repositories will be slightly different depending the environment that they are targeting to. And of course, in order to sync that state into a real cluster, the mechanism or the tool that it's doing that, in this case, I'm showing Argo CD, will need to have access to all these places to actually perform those operations.
Yeah. The configuration will have the full URL that the pod needs, right? And it could be different.
Exactly.
So if you do a diff between the two environments, you should see differences, and then that's perfectly is one of them, like where you're pulling from.
And because I did service pipelines before, I think that this diagram is showing that it can be kind of like a good practice to do promotions by sending pull requests to different repositories, right? Because now the configuration is stored in Git. That basically means that if I test, my development environment and everything is working fine, and I want to promote the latest changes, in this case, the service version 1.1.2 to the staging repository, the only thing that I need to do is to push the configuration change to the configuration repository for the staging environment.
Yeah. I think that's ahead of I think you show in this first section of like how it was done in the past. I think we discussed that, like Jenkins pushing to machines, right, and sending that to each one, and then you explain like the GitOps, and then you point out to the
Open GitOps.
Which I was part of the first. I think Maurice and other people were part of the definition of this. It was like 3 years ago or something, because and just a little bit of background on this. At that time, before this existed, take it as you want, but a lot of people were saying GitOps was putting the files in Git, and then you will have Jenkins pulling the files, the YAML files from Git, and using the kubectl or kubectl command line to push the configuration. And since you're doing operations and you have the files are from Git, that should be GitOps. And there was a big debate online. A lot of people like, because one person was calling GitOps, another person was like, you're not doing GitOps. And this is where like the Flux and the Argo, what kind of the two first project that implemented like the reconciliation loop around GitOps, where you have an agent in the cluster, outside the cluster, but mostly in the agent, doing like every 3 minutes or every like once in a while, like basically doing that Jenkins job in a cron job. And then there's a lot of people that said, I would just put Jenkins on a cron job, and then call it GitOps.
I guess that finding the drift from the environment to the configuration is a big part of it. But I think that one reason why I pointed to this is that there are like different flavors. Like, in this case, like this definition is pulled automatically, right? Like it's not push.
Yep.
So there were some discussions about that as well. And also where the configuration should be stored, even if it's called GitOps, like you can actually store in a different kind of storage that it's also immutable. And I think that that's perfectly fine. So I think that this definition can like help the industry to say, okay, now we know what GitOps is, and when we talk about GitOps, we are talking about these 4 principles.
Yeah, your configuration, people save it on Git. It could be in Helm, right? It can be in OCI. Like people put the YAML files in OCI, or just point directly to the Helm chart version.
Or to an S3 bucket, right?
Oh, an S3 bucket. Yep.
Yeah. I think it's like a very interesting point to see that it's not only Git. I think that you need to
have it here. You have a good diagram here showing that continuous reconciliation.
Hey everyone.
Hello.
This is Farooq. Hey, so apologize for being late. So
no worries.
So I was looking for the presentation because we are running out of the time. So so let's quickly some of the stuff, and then we will switch to the presentation, and we have a small demo. Yeah.
Oh, you have a demo and a
Yeah,
presentation?
I have prepared a small demo. I was assuming that it's a basically a very lightweight demo. I was assuming, but the audience is like already highly skilled. So anyhow, I will try to cover it as soon as possible. But next time, hopefully, I will be going for the very advanced level presentation as
Sounds
well as for the demo. Yeah.
sounds good. Is the demo related to the chapter, or is it something completely different?
Yeah, it is basically related to the chapter.
Okay.
Basically, I'm going to deploy a very simple application WordPress with MySQL. Basically, the idea is like generically cloud native, how to deploy cloud native applications using the cloud services XYZ. Basically, on EKS.
Are you
Nice.
going to be using Argo CD?
Yeah, but not this time. Might be the next time. I will definitely use Argo CD pipelines and the concept of GitOps. Yeah,
Good.
Okay.
definitely
I think.
next time.
All right. Sounds good. Sounds good. Yeah. So where we were, Carlos, we were talking about the Git repository and the pipelines. Basically, now we are talking about environments and syncing, applications to those environments, syncing configuration to that, and just keep them in sync using that reconciliation loop, right?
Yeah. Yep.
And I think that I mentioned that sync can be done in different ways, right? Like using YAMLs or using Helm charts, depending on the tool that you're using, different mechanisms are provided to make sure that the configuration stay in sync with the cluster. And I think that I spent some time there, like in the introduction, also talking about the idea of the main reason why I think that this is a good thing to do, which is like not touching the cluster directly, right? So when you implement this pattern, you stop interacting with the cluster directly and you let the tool to sync from a Git repository the current state of the cluster. And I think that for Kubernetes, that's also considered kind of like one of the best practices to make sure that you don't have direct access to the cluster and you can just keep track of the changes that you are applying into the cluster every time that you push into the Git repository.
Yeah, and I like this picture. This is the picture that I used when I described the GitOps bridge of on uh end users using Ansible, Terraform, Pulumi,
Mhm.
Chef to create and update the cluster, and then helping users to avoid deploying Kubernetes resources, a Helm chart using Ansible and Pulumi, and then switch to the right side, right? Use the GitOps tool to do things inside the cluster. So that's something that I've been like doing a lot in my talks of like telling people use infrastructure as code. Actually, today I'm going to have a live stream on Pulumi and Argo. Use infrastructure as code for the creating of the Kubernetes cluster and the VPC and databases and things like that the cluster needs. And then anything inside the cluster, please do not use those infrastructure as tools. Use something like Flux or Argo, right?
Exactly.
So that picture has that. Moving on to the other one is this one, right? Environment pipelines in Kubernetes.
Yeah. So let me clarify a little bit about that, like why I'm calling that, like instead of calling it GitOps like straight away, I think that I decided to focus more on environments because as a developer, I think that it's much easier to conceptualize if you think that a cluster that you're targeting to is basically an environment that it's running and it has a purpose, right? It can be like an ephemeral environment that you're using for development purposes, but more
Right.
serious
Or a
environments will give
namespace.
you this.
It's sometimes
Exactly,
just a
it could be
namespace.
nexus.
Like you don't
That's true.
really don't care, right? If it's where the cluster is or if it's a different cluster, but the namespace, right?
Yeah, and I tend to think that like when it's something like it's ephemeral, that it's for development purposes,
Yeah.
you actually don't need all the having everything in Git and then just deploying that. But when the environments are becoming more serious and they are like being shared across teams or across like team members, that's where you need the
Persistent.
formality of understand the changes that you are applying to that.
I see. And vCluster is a great ephemeral Kubernetes cluster.
That's
It
coming
is
next
in
week,
clean
I think.
sharing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I have one question. I guess this is not
Yep.
related to the topic, but it is related to the GitOps and Argo CD. So just want to know, I was going through the Argo CD and there was a concept that Argo CD works on both pull and push principles, right?
Mhm.
So do we have any example like in which Argo CD is using the concept of push inside of pull? Like I haven't seen so far.
So push is the Argo CD is basically a controller that you put inside the cluster, and you can say is pulling from Git and applying inside the cluster. Argo CD has the concept of remote clusters where you can have like one Kubernetes cluster having Argo CD, and then maybe you have 3 clusters that don't have Argo CD, like dev, staging, and production. So that Argo CD that becomes kind of like your control plane or your management cluster is not to run workloads or apps. And then Argo CD will pull from Git. It's going to pull from Git and then reconcile to the Kubernetes, but instead of the itself, it's going to push to those remote clusters that don't have Argo CD. So it's kind of like a pull and push method of doing GitOps. So that's the one that I know is specific to Argo CD. I don't know if Marisa knows another one.
No, I think that covers pretty much the same kind of like perception that I have. Are you looking, Faru, for something where like basically you change something in Git and then you just automatically kick kind of like a pipeline to actually push into the cluster, right?
Yes, something like that. Yep.
Yeah, I don't think that Argo does that. I'm not entirely
No,
sure.
well, in terms of Argo, it's like notifying Argo that there's something different to reconcile. So Argo CD can be configured in a loop.
Click,
by default, it's 3 minutes. You can make it 1 minute. You can make it 10 minutes. It depends. I've been doing Argo CD scalability. I'm part of the Argo CD scalability working group. So if you have a 50,000, we did a blog post of like 50,000 apps across 50 clusters or 500 clusters. Then you tune that. But anyway, you can Argo CD would like has a loop like every 3 minutes. You can change that, or you can have Git send a webhook notification. Like when you change something in Git, like GitHub has a way of like sending a post HTTP to the Argo API, and then Argo will wake up and say, "Oh, this app needs to be reconciled."
That would be the push flow, right? Yeah, perfect.
Push. It's kind of the push on the notification, not push of the app.
Exactly. Yeah, sounds good.
And that's one of the patterns that I do with like large enterprise end users, where like they have a management cluster that have all the toolings. Like they have Argo CD and they have Crossplane and they have all these toolings to manage the other fleet of clusters. And they do the hub and spoke pattern where they have like hundreds of clusters out there that don't have Argo CD, and then just like reconcile to the devs and the staging and production.
Perfect.
Sounds
good.
The other one, go ahead.
Go for it. No, go for it. I think that the next section is basically explaining that, like the structure of the repository, kind of what is like a configuration repository structure, what it will contain, and some examples with Helm file, or like just Helm charts or just YAML files.
Yeah, this one is the configuration that you save in Git. I don't know if you mentioned in the book of versioning that configuration.
In which sense? That's going to be versioned because it's in the repository, right? But then you can just create tags, right?
Yeah, or branches or tags, right? Like not everyone pushes from master, right? Or main, right? It's not, you don't put it in production. But the pattern I think the one to show here is it's a good practice to always follow the head kind of thing. And not use branches for environments. It's a hot topic. A lot of people say like they want to have branches for the environment. I'm on the camp of like Git is just a database that you have folders or tables, and then you have the environment sitting in Git, and it's in head, and you have prod, staging. You just have label different folders. It could be customized, or it could be values, staging .yaml or values .yaml, and not use branches because it's not the typical thing of like you have the configuration for staging that you want to promote to production. Like Savi mentioned it, right? In production, you're always going to use a different container registry host name, so you will never like merge from staging to production. So you will have 2 folders or 2 configurations in there, and then you have like a bunch. If you have one big repo with like hundreds of environments, you will have like folders. I'm a folder person, so I like to find the cloud provider, subfolder, region, subfolder, business unit, folder, and then have 3 folders in there: dev, staging, and production. So I don't know. That's a topic, right?
I am with you, Carlos, there, right? Like the example is showing staging as a directory there, right?
Yeah.
And I think that in Git, it's the same thing. Like in Git, I have it organized in that way because I believe that that's conceptually easier to understand. And then for larger scenarios, the folder structure will become a little bit more complicated. But exactly what you said, right? Like when you're moving from staging to production, you will probably have some kind of like patching for making sure, patching and validation, right? Like that the right images are being pulled, the right configurations, the right environment variables are being set, and all that stuff.
I don't know if you cover like common things like like the configuration values that are common across dev, staging, and production in customize. I think it used to be called base. For some reason, the last year or so, I've been hearing that they don't like base. I think they removed the base thing, but it's overrides basically. But people I've seen like I keep using the word base. I'm used to it. But you have the base, right? And then you have dev production that you override the common things. And then in Helm, I do the same thing. I have the Helm chart and I have values.yaml, which are the default values that everybody gets. And then you have the values staging under staging or production that will override certain blocks on it.
That's right.
Let me see what else we have. Themes. Yeah.
Themes, and I think then I just jump into Argo, right? Like because I wanted to make sure that as like in every chapter, I wanted to make sure that we show like at least we discuss a tool, and then you can jump into the Git repository just to follow through like deploying the application that we have been deploying in the previous, chapters too.
Yeah.
So and a shout out to Jenkins X. That's the first thing that I mentioned there, and then I go into how Argo CD works and the main considerations that you need to take into like just running Argo CD for like the application that we're using. Remember that the application is not a simple application, right? Remember the application has like a couple of like components like databases that you need to deploy to. So I'm just trying to replicate the things that we did before, just deploying our application in kind. In this time, just pointing to a Git repository and just deploying that into like the cluster.
Yeah, these are the Argo docs. One thing that I will point out, I think I also made a PR. I always use a Helm chart to deploy Argo CD, and then I have Argo CD. Some people find it controversial, but I think that's the best practice that from the Argo CD community is like Argo CD managing Argo CD. So if you need to change the configuration on Argo CD, you will have Argo CD like doing GitOps on itself. And then you do it through a Helm chart. So this is the direct way of doing it. You have install.yaml. You can create your own customized version, or you can use the Helm, which I think I also made a PR because it's like it's not.
It should be down there.
Fine. No, I think I was looking for it. I'll send a PR because I always try to find my 2 link in here and I can never find it.
And it's not there.
So
good.
Yeah, I think you tell people to install Argo CD in the kind cluster, right? And then you go over like using the GUI to create your first app.
And pointing to the repository where all the examples are, that it has like a staging directory there in chapter 4.
Chapter 4, Argo CD staging,
exactly.
from the repo, right? So this is the directory structure
that's
that
the
you were
tutorial,
mentioning, right?
Exactly, yeah.
So you'll be deploying this, right?
Exactly.
So you have the values.yaml. It's empty because I think it's just deploying the chart, right?
It's using the default values. That's the chart. And it's using that idea that it will depend it will deploy that basically base chart to install that. I'm using the Helm integration just to show that because you can actually do what you were saying before of changing the values files for different configurations.
Yeah, so I want to point out that this is relative new, right? When people were used to using Helm charts, you needed to point the repository to a
chart
URL,
repository.
HTTPS URL that had an index.yaml, and that basically told Helm like where to fetch the Helm charts, which are TGG. And then this is becoming kind of like a best practice of using OCI, because the benefit is that in the same place that you have your container images for your apps, you will have the Helm charts in there. So configuring the access, the networking, the proxy, and scanning, right? Even scanning these charts, it'll be easy to scan them when they're sitting in the in an OCI registry versus having an index. So just so for some folks to be aware of that, if you work in an environment where you are like maybe air gap, or you want to get the charts from the community inside your organization, you can just use your, like, you don't have to figure out what server, HTTP server or web server or chart museum to install. You can leverage the same container image that you put in your Docker images.
Yeah, I always tend to think again, like for developers and for like people, operations people, right? Like one less thing to maintain. Now you maintain a container registry, you have a set of credentials that are secure enough for your environments, and you don't need to deal with the Helm chart repository, which is another thing that will be stored somewhere else that you need to maintain and secure and make sure that you share the right credentials to the right people.
Yep. And if you're doing this in a secure environment, make sure that Argo CD can access, because Argo CD will be doing kind of a Helm template. So we'll be accessing this. So sometimes it's secure with a token or username and password. So you need to configure Argo CD secrets with that information.
Exactly. So basically what I do there is I just deploy with the default values file, and then I just to prove the point, I just change the application configuration just by selecting another values file in the same repository, right? That's not usually something that I would recommend, but I wanted to show how the syncing works. And I remember, Carlos, that you mentioned that I need to make the sync automatic. So you can see that in the final version is automatically syncing. I remember that at the beginning I had it manual because I wanted people to go and click the button, but
no, I think I would say leave it manual, because that people like can interact, right? See what's happening, but syncing versus not syncing, that's also another best practice topic. I know that we don't talk about production here, but in most cases in production you will have sync disable, and in non-production you will have sync enable. And then you ask, like, then when we want to push something into production, do I need to have Mauricio coming into the office and click the button, or do we have something that was like do the automatic sync? And what most people, end users, do that are maturing Argo CD, they use a CI. So when you're about the CI, usually they use the Argo CD CLI, and then these are like big customers from Jenkins. You don't have to use nothing massive. From Jenkins, they will go on over and then sync from the Argo CD CLI and sync the version that you want to deploy, to be sure that they have after it passes all the testing, right? So after you're passing all the testing and they push the kit, then instead of waking up automatically, they want to be sure that there's a manual gate, right? Or a schedule or a window, or like we only provision on Tuesday. So it's in Git, but maybe they're waiting until like Tuesday at 2 p.m. where they do the sync. So it's automatically done at that time by Jenkins or the CI pipeline.
And I think that for sensitive environments, it makes a lot of sense to have some other gates, but also some other tests that you want to run before syncing to the real cluster, right? Sometimes you want to run like some, late stages performance testing before actually applying to your live customers using actually your application. So I think that it makes a lot of sense to go over that. Adding CI there, I would hope that there will be more hooks in the future for Argo CD. And I know that Argo CD is going to integrate to a couple of projects that will enable you to not only see what's going on in the production environment and if things are going wrong, but also to have the right hooks to call kind of like external tasks to execute before syncing.
Yep. Let me see, dealing with changes the GitOps way. You have here explaining.
Yeah, I go with the application now. So now I'm making changes to the application itself, and I show that every service will have a fixed version. And now if you go and make a change in one of these services, then you will have a new version of this service, and you will need to change the configuration in this case into the staging environment. updating the version of that service in this case, just to reflect, just to have the latest version of the service that you just changed.
Yeah, so the developer will send that update to configuration through pull request, right?
Exactly.
And,
it could be the developer. It could be an automated tool.
I think you had it somewhere automatically. I thought there was a.
I think that's for
here
promotions.
It is,
right? Yeah, for promotions, I would say that not for promotions, but imagine that you have like you are creating new versions of a service. The tool that is storing the artifacts or something looking at the container registry can say, "Hey, I have a new version from this service," so I can automatically send a pull request to the, to a list of repositories that we know that they are running that service.
I see.
I think that's kind of like what I'm trying to explain there.
Yeah, and one cool thing that I've done in the past with some consulting that I did was use GitHub's auto merge capability. I think in the past GitHub I've been getting didn't have this capabilities auto merge. I think it was a bot or something called auto merge. But you will merge, like, you still want the pull request, so you have the history, who changed it. Also, GitHub make it very easy, and other Git services, right? Make it very easy to roll back, that you can find the PR, because sometimes you want to roll back and you don't know what to roll back if you just push to head, right? So if you're having the PR, you can go back and say, oh, we want to roll back this PR, and you can click a button on their Git server, GitLab, GitHub, click one button on that PR, and then we'll create a new PR that reverse the changes from that PR. So it's easier to roll back. But yeah, having auto merge, meaning like auto testing happening, right? Auto testing happening if it's smoke test or whatever it needs to be done, and it will auto merge maybe in dev and staging, maybe in production. The PR is just sitting there for someone, like I said, like merge it at a certain time, or automation merge it in a certain window, or more robust testing, right? Needs to happen before it gets merged into production. Or if it's something simple, then auto merge in production, right?
Yeah. As soon as the nice thing about the merge bot was that it will check all the checks in the pull request, right? Like it will run all the tests, and it will wait for all the tests to finish and to be green in order to actually do the automatic merge. And you can fine-grainedly define what the merge criteria is.
Yeah, that's just a one way. At least we do it in some projects in open source CNCF. I know I did it in Knative, and in Kubernetes upstream we use a lot of like slash comments. So people like will do slash looks good to me. Certain folks, like, it will mark the code review but not get merged. And then if somebody does like a slash approve, then it would eventually get merged when all the testing happens. So the testing can take 1 minute, or can take 5 minutes, can take 15 minutes, but eventually would auto merge when all the tests and GitHub Actions are done. And so you have it here, right? Manual sign off, like that validation of like some folks just want to manually sign off and then find that change request. One thing that I've seen is some end users want to integrate with a change management system. This could be like Jira or ServiceNow. So they need to know, like, the service went live, today, and X, and it's this version, and they want to have a ticket or a record in Jira, so you can have that automation, right? Have the ticket being updated when it gets merged, when it gets deployed, so you can have that automation in place, even if it's GitOps. So a lot of people think because they have those change requirements on change management, they cannot use GitOps. Like they said, like, oh, we cannot do GitOps because we do certain things. Like, with all these things have APIs, right? We live in an API world where, like, Jira has APIs, ServiceNow has APIs, Git service have APIs, so you can orchestrate your change management in terms of APIs, right? You don't have to say, oh, we cannot do GitOps because everything's automated.
100%. And I think that, like, the last part of the chapter is that it's like just linking back on where GitOps and environment pipelines fit into the entire kind of like platform ecosystem that we are starting to build up in the book, right? Like, before we talk about building artifacts and storing these artifacts in registries, we talk about like the complexities of cloud-native applications. But now with this, when we are talking about environments, then is where, like, we need to go back and understand how these start being part of kind of like the platform story, right? Because there will be a team that needs to be in charge of setting up all these tools and setting up the practices and making sure that people, developers, and the entire organization understand how many environments do we have, how do we manage them, and what are the tools that are being used to promote things across different environments.
Yeah, the platform team, like, is the one that it's need to make it easy for the developers. Like they are in charge of like deciding if we have 3 clusters or we have 1 cluster and 3 namespaces. Where are the clusters? And then automate the process of scaffolding. Right, that's something that is very popular. Things like I'm working in projects like Canoe and Backstage, where like scaffolding, like I'm starting a new project and be able to click a button and say like create me a Go application or a Node.js application, means creating a new Git repo, putting the files in there, including the YAML files, or creating two repos, putting a hello world with the best practices, and then hooking that repo to Argo CD automatically, right? So you start like coding and making changes, and then automatically Argo CD is deploying your app to maybe staging and or dev automatically, and then the CI/CD pipelines like creating PRs for production eventually.
Exactly.
I think that's it. Do we have? Let me check the chat. I think Sevi have a couple of questions. I think you have some comments.
There was a few comments. I have a question though. Before we run out of time. So now you just mentioned platform engineers are serving developers, right? So I keep thinking about how we could get feedback from them, like how we could create feedback loops at the right time before maybe going too mature, and we give them a very mature environment that they don't actually understand that well. So I was thinking about these quite a lot. Like, can you share your experiences around this a little bit, how you can build feedback loops maybe with dev teams?
Yeah, so I think that I cover this in this chapter, the idea of, again, not pushing something like GitOps for development tasks, right? Because again, if you need to go through an entire cycle of pushing changes into a repository and then waiting for a tool to sync into a cluster to actually see if your changes are correct, that will take quite a lot, and it will kind of make more complicated the feedback loop, right? So for development practices, what platform teams can do, like for development teams, is that make sure that developers have the right tools to iterate fast. And sometimes that might even mean that they don't even need to have a local Kubernetes clusters. They can use different tools to just focus on coding what they need to code, and bootstrap all the services that they need in a way that they don't actually have a remote dependency. In some cases, you can do that. In some other cases, you need to bootstrap remote environments fast enough for developers to work and kind of skip all the formality of promoting stuff to environments if they are just doing development tasks.
Yeah, so unblocking them in their development would be probably the best comment. Feedback they could give. Okay.
And remove the barriers, right? Remove all the intermediate steps that developers are not interested in, or that they delay the feedback loop.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, and having that template and review it with developers, or have access for developers to those templates. Like when you create that template that the developers is going to git clone into their computer, make it open, right? So they can make comments, create issues, enhance it, because that template is the one that they're going to use locally, like Mauricio said. And it could be they're using something like Scaffold, or they're using Co, or they're using Telepresence, or they're using Tilt. Who else I'm missing? Octeto, right? Awesome. Octeto CLI. So they need to decide, and it could be one team likes one and the other one likes the other one. But if you make the templates that Backstage is creating for them accessible, then they can give feedback, right? In terms of feedback is pull request. Feedback could be a GitHub issue that they want to add something to the template, and the template becomes kind of their user experience on the dev cycle, the quick one.
Yeah. And it's funny because even after writing the entire book, after saying, okay, this book is ready to be printed, like the developer experience movement started to come quite hard, right? Like people actually start saying, okay, we have all these tools. Now we understand all these tools and how they kind of should work together, but then we need to step up our game for enabling developers to be faster, basically, which makes total sense, right? So that's one of the chapters that I need to add for the second edition of the book, because it has been changing quite a lot, right? Like Carlos, I think that you forgot DevPod and a bunch of other things.
DevPod. I'm a fan of DevPod.
Exactly.
Yeah, Dev
Yeah,
containers. Yeah.
DevPod, Dev containers. There is kind of like a German company, I think that it's called Garden as well. They are doing pretty advanced stuff to enable developers to go faster in these kind of environments. So basically, to hide in a way all these tools and how they work. But for platform engineers, we need to know how these tools operate and how they work and how do they relate to other tools in the ecosystem.
Yeah, I would say, yeah, I'm working on the project called Canoe. Some of the community members are working, and one cool trick that we have is called the IDP builder. And I did this in the past. You mentioned like making a change for a developer to git commit or git add, git commit to change the YAML, push it, go to Argo or wait Argo for the 3 minutes to sync, right? It's a long loop. One of the things that we have in IDP Builder that maybe we can extract out is we have a Git server that we install inside the Kubernetes cluster. And then in your laptop, we have the IDP Builder, which is a CLI that is watching the YAML files. So anytime you make a change to the YAML file, the tool will actually take the changes, push it directly into the Git server, and then wake up Argo CD immediately. So it's not as fast as the other ones, right? As Scaffold is. I'm a fan of Scaffold. I started a long time ago. But Go also is good because Go is only for Go. But that could be one way of iterating faster in terms of making sure that the Argo app that you use in dev works in staging and so on.
Exactly.
Yeah, brilliant piece of information. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's it. We're going to be doing the next chapter 5 next week. I will be around, and I hope others will be around, and then we'll do the multi-cloud app infrastructure. I think this one touches on crossplane, is it, or vCluster?
Yep. No, that's a little bit more around crossplane and the need of provisioning infrastructure across different cloud providers, and even like local infrastructure for our application in this case.
Yeah, because our app is the conference app, and it uses SQL database, it uses Redis, it uses Kafka.
Exactly.
Right. So when we're going to deploy this app into production, you might not want to run those as little pods or pods in Kubernetes, right?
Exactly.
You may want to leverage a cloud provider, and the developers really don't want to learn all those in and outs, and the platform team needs to provide kind of the interface to that. So we'll talk more about that next week. Hopefully, we can set up the demo. I think this one has the repo has a demo for this, so we can
it
try
does.
it out.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, and it's using the latest crossplane. I think like it was updated by the crossplane guys. I think that like a couple of weeks ago. So it's using crossplane 1.15, I think, which is great.
Okay, good.
Yeah, because it's a funny story. I don't think that I will be able to join next week, but it's a funny story. Like they actually broke some internal things. Like I was using pinned versions, like very specific versions, to make sure that the example keep working, even if they make changes. But they changed the hosting for their images. They move it from Docker to like the GitHub
uxp.registry, something like that.
Yeah, exactly. So and that kind of like broke the example completely. So now it's fixed and it's using the latest version, and I'm happy with that. I'm really happy.
Okay.
Cool. Yeah. I also sent a little PR to the documentation. Yeah, I tried Podman, and there's just one little command to execute it rootful. That's all you need for Podman on your local environment.
Perfect for the examples here in the repository.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Did you send
because
the pull request to the...
Yes, I did. I did.
Yes, to
Right,
run
right,
kind on Pacman. That was very cool. Sevi was using Pacman
Awesome,
when he
awesome,
showed
awesome.
the demo.
Mauricio, I'd like to do a
Yes.
PR for the project and include a dev container setup. So
I think
Yes,
that would be great.
please.
yeah,
That would be great.
I'm a fan of dev containers. If I can
Me
find
too,
a
me
dev,
too.
because I use DevPod because I don't have enough GitHub spaces hours. I run out of those. So, but I can DevPod and then run a in my machine, right? Machine that I have, Linux machine anywhere.
Cool. I guess I'll give it a stab at it. Let's see how that goes.
Perfect.
Yep. Cool.
Please do that. Yeah. Thank you very much, Sevi. Your pull request was merged. That's
Oh,
great.
brilliant.
Look at
You are
that.
now
Super
now
quick.
part of the contributors. You should show up in the conference application. I don't know if you saw the conference application has kind of like an about section with the faces
Okay.
of all
I
the contributors.
didn't see that. Okay.
Wow.
Yes.
I need to
Oh,
I need to
brilliant.
fix something. Is the cross-playing AWS works? I can fix that.
Yeah, let's find
You can-
something else to contribute. Yeah.
So we add you there to the conference about page.
Oh,
Yes.
thanks, man. Cheers.
There you go.
Okay. Well, thank you, folks. This has been the post-KubeCon Kubernetes book club session for today, chapter 4 on platform engineering. And yeah, so subscribe for the next meetup next week. And also remember Thursdays, there's also another series doing with the white paper on artificial intelligence on cloud native. So thank you, folks, for joining today, and have a great weekend.
Have a great weekend, everyone.
Thank you, folks.
See you next week. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you so
Bye.
much,
Thank
folks.
you.